Here's the uncomfortable punchline. Most countries aren't going broke. Their business model is. In several advanced economies, annual interest payments are now flirting with the size of the defense budget. That's not ideology. That's a balance sheet problem. For decades, debt was cheap, growth was decent, and demographics were friendly. That world is over. Now governments are running a company with shrinking customers, rising payroll, and a credit card bill that resets higher every year. If that sounds like a failing business model, it's because it is. Part 1. The big picture. Different flags, same math. This crisis isn't partisan, it's structural. 5 pressures define this era. First, chronic fiscal deficits. Budgets haven't balanced in years, not even in the good times. Second, aging populations. In many rich countries, about 1 in 5 citizens is now over 65. That means fewer workers and more healthcare, more pensions, more dependency. Third, welfare commitments. These systems were built for a world with 4 workers per retiree. Today? Closer to 2. Fourth, a debt structure that rolled over at near zero rates. Now it resets at numbers everyone can feel. Fifth, an inflation feedback loop. Inflation boosts nominal tax revenue, but it also pushes up wages, pensions, and interest costs, keeping deficits alive. You don't need a spreadsheet to see it. Global public debt is now around the $100 trillion mark, and the bills keep rising. This isn't a temporary storm, it's a new climate. Part 2. The business model of modern states. Imagine the modern state as a company, one with 3 revenue streams and 4 cost centers it can't escape. Revenue comes from 1. Taxes, income, consumption, capital. 2. Debt, borrowing against tomorrow's taxpayers. 3. Inflation, a blunt tool that raises nominal revenue while quietly shrinking old debt. Spending is anchored by 1. Pensions, tied to longer lifespans. 2. Healthcare, better technology, higher costs. 3. Interest, the price of past decisions. 4. Defense and security, in a world that isn't calming down. Here's the truth governments rarely say aloud. The fiscal model built in the 20th century doesn't work in a world of slow growth, aging citizens, and normal interest rates. When growth slows, tax revenue slows. When populations age, mandatory spending rises. When rates normalize, refinancing eats the future. For years, cheap money hid the weakness. Debt service was tiny. Stimulus felt painless. Central banks backstopped everything. Then rates rose. Maturing bonds came back like lease renewals at double the rent. Interest stopped being a footnote and became a headline. Meanwhile, the workforce shrank. Dependency ratios slid from roughly 4 workers per retiree to 2. That's not a political slogan problem. That's payroll math. Raise taxes? Possible, but less effective in slow economies. Cut spending? Possible, but most of it is politically untouchable. Inflate the debt away? Possible, but inflation raises next year's costs too. A model that once worked became a leaky bucket. You pour in taxes, plug holes with debt, warm the water with inflation, and the level still drops because the holes got bigger. Part 3. Case studies. United States, the debt structure problem. The US has the deepest capital markets on Earth. That's the strength and the weakness. Debt issued at tiny rates is now rolling over at higher ones. Annual interest costs are approaching $1 trillion, one of the fastest growing expenses in the budget. Tax revenue follows the economy, but spending follows demographics and policy. The math pushes toward a slow-motion debt spiral unless something, growth, rates, or spending, breaks the trend. This isn't politics, it's the maturity schedule. Europe, welfare meets demographics. Europe built a social contract that lifted living standards for decades. It also built fixed obligations that are hard to unwind. In several EU countries, social spending now sits near a quarter of GDP. When growth slows, budgets feel it immediately. Aging populations, health costs, defense spending, and energy transition investments all press upward. The North-South divide creates different fiscal pressures under one currency. The result? Tight fiscal space and constant triage. Japan, the extreme model. Japan is the endgame of aging and slow growth. Public debt stands well above 200% of GDP. For years it was financed cheaply, mostly at home. This buys stability, until it doesn't. If wages rise and savers demand higher yields, the central bank must intervene. Each intervention tightens the balancing act. Japan can do Japan. Most countries can't copy this without risking a currency crisis. Emerging markets, the dollar trap. Many emerging countries borrow in foreign currency. When global rates rise and the dollar strengthens, their debt service explodes. Revenue is local, debt is global. One bad harvest or commodity swing can tip the balance. Defaults aren't destiny, but the risk is real. Part 4. The Fiscal Loop. Here's the loop in plain English. Step 1. Deficits rise. Recessions, relief programs, wars, demographics. Take your pick. Step 2. Debt increases. New bonds cover the gap. Step 3. Interest costs grow. Old, cheap debt matures. New, expensive debt replaces it. Interest compounds and begins crowding out everything else. Step 4. Policymakers react. Stimulus, easing, or indirect monetization. Step 5. Inflation shrinks old debt. Nominal GDP rises, and ratios look better. Step 6. Inflation lifts future costs. Pensions, wages, healthcare, contracts, everything reprices upward. Step 7. Back to deficits. Unless growth outpaces spending, the cycle resets. Two numbers show why this loop has fuel. About 20% of people in many rich countries are over 65. Global public debt sits near $100 trillion. This flywheel once ran on cheap energy. Now it runs on expensive fuel, and throws heat you can't ignore. Part 5. Impact on ordinary people. Macro becomes personal. Higher taxes appear as bracket creep, payroll charges, or VAT changes. Real wages slip when raises lag behind supermarket prices. Social services stretch, longer waits, tighter eligibility. Healthcare and pensions cost more as the workforce shrinks and wages rise. Loans stay expensive because the government competes with everyone else for funding. Housing becomes unstable when rates squeeze both builders and budgets. It's not dramatic, it's cumulative. A few hundred more on a payment. A few months more on a waitlist. A few percentage points more in deductions. Pressure that feels quiet until it doesn't. Countries don't suddenly go bankrupt. They drift into a world where old promises no longer match new realities. When growth slows, populations age, and money costs money again, the old fiscal business model breaks down. Governments aren't villains. They're firms with a structural mismatch between revenue and costs, one that compounds over time. The clear lesson: nations don't go broke. Their business model becomes unsustainable. Fix the model, or the model will fix you. Stay curious, stay sharp.